Hello, biologists! Today we are on Chapter 16, Plants, Fungi, and the Move onto Land. We've talked about the mechanisms of evolution, and in this chapter we're going to elaborate a bit more. We're going to get a little bit more specific by looking at plants, fungus, and how all of this moved onto land. So how it all started. Ancestors of plants are algae. Algae has to stay in water. Most of you know this. Most of you have encountered this if you swim in creeks. Well, algae first evolved over 500 million years ago. Today we have these things called charophytes, and this is a modern day version of algae, and it may resemble one of the early ancestors of plants. To colonize land, so to move onto land, plants had to have different adaptations. For example, they needed to reduce water loss, they needed to reproduce differently, etc., etc. And we're going to look at some of those different evolutionary adaptations in different types of plants. So plant is a multicellular eukaryote, and it's a photoautotroph. Photo means light, auto means self, troph means eating or how it eats. This is also known as photosynthesis, making organic molecules via photosynthesis, and we've already talked about this, so I won't delve into it today. To come onto land, so this is terrestrial area or habitat. Photosynthetic organisms need to have air and soil. They need light to make energy, and they need carbon dioxide for making sugars. They also need water and nutrients from the soil. All of that requires specialized structures. You'll have roots that anchor the plant, and you'll have a portion above ground. Algae is good. Algae stays in water and has all of these processes happening in one spot. It's getting all of its resources right there. Whereas plants need a little bit more specialization for all of these things to occur. In order to be successful and to survive and thrive on land, plants need to keep from drying out. They need to get their nutrients, and they need to have the ability to reproduce. So we're going to look at the adaptations for plants to be able to do all of these things. An interesting part of your book talks about symbiosis, or an interaction between species where mutualism can happen. Mutualism is a type of symbiosis. There are different types. We're going to talk about mutualism where both benefit. For example, fungus has an association with plant roots where the fungus can help the plants absorb the nutrients better, and the plant provides the fungus with food. So let's look at that. That fungus and root association is called mycorrhizae. The fungi help absorb the water nutrients from the soil, and they provide these to the plant, and plants produce sugars that nourish the fungi. By the way, fungi is plural for fungus. We don't say funguses. We say fungi, and then fungus is singular. It's one. Fungi is many. Fungus is one. A plant without mycorrhizae won't be very successful. So this adaptation right here, this mycorrhizae, is an important adaptation so that plants can be very successful on land. This is a picture of a mycorrhizae association, and interestingly, you can send your soil out to a lab to see what mycorrhizae you have present if you wanted to know. Now we know how plants get the water from the soil, and the question becomes, how do they retain that water? They don't want to dry out and die. They want to be able to keep that water. So first we have to look at the leaves. The main portion where surface area becomes important is the leaf. Leaves are where photosynthesis takes place, and the broader the leaves are, the more light they can get and the more energy they can receive. So let's look at some structural adaptations that help decrease the water loss. So first we have stomata. These are tiny pores on a leaf surface where gas exchange occurs. Remember when we looked at the different types of photosynthesis, we looked at the stomata. Some plants can close their stomata during certain times of day to prevent drying out. So those would probably be those desert plants. Look back at that chapter to get a little bit more information. But this is a very important structure that helps reduce water loss. Another one, let's look at the cuticles. That's that last one right there. Over most of the plant, there's a cuticle. It's a waxy layer that prevents water loss. So it's essentially an oil layer that keeps the water in. And then right here in the middle, the second one, we have vascular tissue. In humans, our blood vessels are part of our vascular system. In plants, it's pretty similar. They have vessels that bring water and nutrients through the plant. They can get the water from the soil and they can bring it up to spread out within the plant. Two types of vascular tissue are the xylem and the phloem. The xylem transports water and minerals from roots to leaves. So from the bottom up from the roots towards the leaves, and the phloem distributes the sugars. And it goes the opposite direction. It goes from the leaves to the roots so that the non-photosynthetic parts of plants can still get energy. And here you can see the stomata right here, where these arrows are pointing. They're made of 2 guard cells, and those are the little holes. Otherwise, the rest is a cuticle made of a waxy layer. And then in this lower picture, you can see the vascular tissue, the xylem and phloem. And these little vessel-like structures that you see on a leaf are actual vessels. The chloroplasts make sugar on the leaf, and they send it down to the roots to the non-photosynthetic cells. So now we're at reproduction. To successfully transition from water to terrestrial environments, we have to have changes in reproduction, reproductive adaptations, if you will. Because plants are not in a water environment, their seeds can dry out, and which means, in other words, dehydrate, so they need to make sure that their seeds are still viable. When they find their reproductive partner, they want the seeds to be viable so that they can, make more plants. Plants have little structures called gametotangia. They're protective structures that have little shell that the gametes form in. So gametes, remember, there are sex cells. Gametes are our egg and our sperm. And we'll look at different ways they do this throughout the different plant groups. You'll find that ovaries are ripened fruit, so the fruits you're eating are ovaries. And when you're allergic to pollen, you're actually allergic to plant sperm. And now let's look at the history and diversity of the plant kingdom. This helps us understand the different adaptations that have come up through different plant systems. We use fossil records to help us look at how these things occurred. We're going to look at bryophytes, we're going to look at ferns, gymnosperms, and angiosperms pretty specifically. And this will help solve the problems we spoke about earlier. Bryophytes were the first ancestral plants we found. They came from algae and are not vascular. They don't have a xylem or phloem, but they do have lignified walls. These are woody walls, and they have roots and they have leaves. Bryophytes are still around today. We see them as mosses, we see them as liverworts, which are pretty much everywhere, and we see them as hornworts, which can be everywhere, but usually they're in damp environments. So mosses first, liverworts, hornworts. After bryophytes, vascular tissue developed, and here the lignin, the woody part, is harder. We don't have seeds yet. Plant evolution is a little bit ahead of fungal evolution, by the way, so let's talk about that for a little bit. Fungi were also around about 500 million years ago in terrestrial areas, but there weren't very many at all until about 400 million years ago. And then we had a lot of fungus. An important thing about fungus is that it decomposes everything down into its nutrients, where we can use it again, where we can cycle it back through our system. But that's about 25 million years where we don't have decomposers, where nothing decayed. It just sat around, and there was lots of nutrient-rich carbon just laying around, just sitting there. And it got covered with the next layers of nutrient-rich carbon just sitting there laying around. This layer is what we dig into to get our fossil fuels, for example, coal. And this period of time is called the Carboniferous period because there's so much carbon. Carboniferous. The conditions to make this happen will never, ever, ever happen again. This is never going to happen again because we have so much fungus that breaks everything down to its nutrients and helps cycle it throughout our system. So once we run out of our fossil fuels, and this is really important, we won't be finding any more. So once we have depleted this coal, these fossil fuels, this layer, we're done. There's no more. So that's why it's really important to find renewable resources of energy for our future generations. All right, so moving on. Bryophytes were non-vascular, ferns were vascular, and next we have gymnosperms. They evolved seeds. You'll have your embryo, and that's packaged along with some food and protective coverage, but they weren't closed up in any chambers. And today's gymnosperms that we see are pine trees with pine cones. Close to the end of the Carboniferous period, it started to get more cold and more dry, and there the gymnosperms with protected seeds did well and exploded into lots of different species. Today, those pine trees I just mentioned are part of a group called conifers. Conifers are cone-bearing plants, and they are gymnosperms. Here's a pretty picture of the Carboniferous period where you have lots of ferns. Back then, there was so much more oxygen in the atmosphere, which allowed the organisms living in it to be very large. That dragonfly that you see right here, it could get to be up to 3 feet long. Could you imagine that? Up to 3 feet long. It's incredible. All right, moving on again. So the pine cones that we can see, for example, this picture right here, that's the female portion. The male portion is this little structure right here, and it makes pollen. So conifers consist mainly of cone-bearing trees such as pines, and they are the most diverse and widespread gymnosperms. Flowers were the next adaptations. Flowering plants are called angiosperms, and they make flowers that bear seeds and ovaries in these protective chambers called ovaries. They were very successful, and now the majority of living plants are over 250,000 species of angiosperms. And most of these angiosperms is where we get our food from. Although both angiosperms and gymnosperms have seeds, angiosperm enclose that seed inside of an ovary, whereas gymnosperms have naked seeds. And then fruit is just a ripened ovary that helps to protect the seed. It helps the seed spread. That's what increases seed dispersal means. It just helps the seed spread further around. And it's a major food source for animals, us included. So whenever we're eating fruits, we're really eating ovaries. We see different types of seed dispersal. We see wind dispersal and milkweed. They're on the left right here, where wind blows it around. We have animal dispersal, animal transportation, where these burrs can stick to animals and be transported to different areas the animals could run to. And then we have animal ingestion. So this counts to animals will eat seeds, they'll move to another area, the animals will defecate, and it effectively spreads those seeds that they ate. Some seeds depend on this. They depend on going through an animal's digestive tract being broken down and then being dispersed. So a little agricultural perspective, gymnosperms supply most of our lumber and paper, and angiosperms provide nearly all of our food. They supply us with fiber, with different medications. We use it in perfumes, and we use it as decoration. This is a great summary slide, so it looks at different plant diversities and what adaptations you see present in each group. This is a good slide to reference. And then right here we have a nice phylogenetic tree showing how everything happened, where everything diverged. So you can read through this on your own, get some practice looking at evolutionary trees. On to fungi. Fungi are super, super important. They are extremely important parts of our ecosystem. They are amazing decomposers. They recycle our nutrients back to our environment for reuse. In the case of mycorrhizae, they help plants absorb minerals and water that the plants need from the soil. And fungi are eukaryotes. They're mostly multicellular, and they're interestingly more closely related to animals than to plants. Some examples include these pictures shown here. This on top is a fairy ring. It's pretty cool. The fungus grows underground, and when it reproduces, it shoots up this reproductive body in the shape of a fungus. When you eat mushrooms, you're eating the reproductive parts of the fungus. Pretty fun, right? Other examples include yeast. So right here, that we have in bread and beer. We have ringworm, roundworm or ringworm, which is a predatory fungus. We don't want that. We have orange fungus right here in a woody area. We have mold that grows on, different fruits and veggies, for example. Anyways, fungi are very diverse. And as I mentioned, fungi are decomposers. Along with bacteria, they help recycle nutrients back into our environment. They help make them available for plants to use and grow, for us to eat and grow, and then whenever plants and animals die, they get broken down, and those nutrients cycle back through the ecosystem. So everything's a cycle. It's not happening in a straight line. It's not just disappearing. Everything is getting cycled through. And that is the end of chapter 16. I hope you enjoyed learning about plants and fungi. Bye-bye.